trouble when you're standing behind that. Speak up.
It's starting to. So I think I'll be okay.
Okay.
Oh, I just think okay.
You ready?
Yep. Ready.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to my presentation. This is like the fourth one on World War I that I've done. Two we were just talking about, the gentleman right here. And, it's a really interesting time. People nowadays, we don't remember World War I, we remember World War II. Because all the World War I people, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, they've all passed. So we don't have that storyteller anymore. And I got interested in doing World War I probably about 10 years ago. I was doing some genealogy research and upstairs in the library on the microfilm, and I kept seeing all these bodies coming back, 1921 in the paper. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And so I had a list of a little book that was done here in Fond du Lac a number of years before that. And I started matching those names with the list. And there were people coming back that weren't on that list. That list was taken off the plaque in the courthouse. There's 92 names on it. I have 177 men and women from Fond du Lac County, that died in the war. It's like half are on that plaque. So I got really interested and got really involved, and I live and breathe it, basically. So that's how I got started on this. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Wayne King. I grew up here in Fond du Lac. After high school, I went to college for 3 years and quit my senior year. Yeah, the draft was going to get me. So I said, well, I'm not going to finish in time, so I quit. I said, I'll let them pay for the last year and a half. Well, it took me 26 and a half years to get out. I was having too much fun. And how many vets do we have in here? Thank you for your service. So I kicked around for 2 years after retiring, and I moved back to Fond du Lac, went back to college, spent another 4 years there. And got a Bachelor's of Science in Education and a history major. So much for me. World War I, we didn't get into the war until well after it started. It started in the summer of 1914, and it had already been raging for 3 years when we got into it. President Wilson asked for a declaration of war, and Congress approved it on the 6th of April, 1917. And we immediately got going. Actually, we got going before that because they were already gearing things up. The National Guard had been called out the year before that to go to the border in Mexico. Pershing wanted them down there so he could have them train. The National Guard never went across the border. That was left for the regular army. Then the National Guard guys came back. They were back just a couple of months when the Declaration of War was signed. So those National Guard units were already pretty well prepared in a lot of respects to go to war. They're going to go. The Fond du Lac units, they had some, after the war was declared, Fond du Lac units geared up. They went on to a wartime status, posted guards at the old armory. They were running 24/7, and they had so many guys volunteer to get in. They actually split the unit. They had ended up with 2 companies instead of the 1. One company went with the 32nd Division. The other company ended up with the 42nd Division. World War I was probably one of the most destructive things, if not the most destructive wars in the history of the world. Estimates are 40 million plus people died during the war. those include civilians and military. And the military count's really only about 10 million. But a lot of those civilians died of flu, starvation, and just destruction by the war. So, and it was worldwide. Even Japan was in World War I. They were fighting in France with allies. So we had countries from all over the world fighting. We were only in it 19 months, and the government has never really fixed a known number of deaths for U.S. military, but it's in the area of 116,000 men and women. Half of those were from disease, the other half were from combat or accidents. But disease was still very prevalent. We did not have the miracle drugs. We didn't have penicillin yet. So a lot of these guys died from pneumonia and things like that. Okay. The war, comes to Fond du Lac. Fond du Lac had 2 draft districts. And on the 5th of June, 1917, every young man from 19 to 30 had to register for the draft. District 1 was the city of Fond du Lac, what we call the Holy Land, and like the town of Friendship and El Dorado. District 2 was the rest of the county. 7,130 men signed draft cards for District 1 and 4,807 for District 2. Of those, just over 2,500 served in the military. Now, that's a very small percentage. It's only not even quite 21%. But a lot of those guys were not physically fit to serve. They had a lot of things. Couldn't see. Some couldn't write, couldn't read. Can't have guys in the military that can't do that. Some spoke no English. Many were aliens. So 2,500, and that doesn't include some of the guys that were already in the service. These are based on the draft cards that are on record. And what's in your wallet? Remember that the commercial on TV? What's in your wallet? Well, this is a draft registration that a man had to carry once he signed up for on June 5th. This belongs to a guy by the name of Robert Holterman. I don't know, some of you may have known his son, Ralph. Passed away about a year and a half or so ago. Okay. Robert and his brother Dan were both in the Company B, the 150th Machine Gun Battalion, 42nd Division, out of Fond du Lac. But that's a little bit later. But this is what their draft card. If you did not have your draft card with you and you were stopped on the street, you could be arrested and put in jail until you could prove that you had registered for the draft. So all these guys, everybody carried them around. Kind of like some of us in the 60s. Don't lose your draft card. So this is out of his diary and his books, which I have a copy of. Ralph did survive the war, as well as his brother. As I said, 177 men and one woman that had lived at some point in Fond du Lac County died in World War I from being killed on the battlefield, their wounds, disease, or accidents. And I shouldn't say on the battlefield, because they didn't all die there. About half of them died before they even got overseas. Died in training. They got sick. The flu in the fall of 1918 just ravaged the training camps. Guys were dying like flies, literally. They would go there and they would get sick. And you guys that were in the military, and you go to basic training, you're all jammed in a room, you're breathing on each other. Just You know, we got pretty good health issues today, you know, a lot of things we can take care of, but back then they had no way to do that. So it spread very quickly. So as I said, battlefield deaths, wounds, disease, accidents, even after the war. A lot of guys were killed in accidents after the war. And if you were wounded, you might die 3 or 4 months after the armistice. Same thing with disease. You may have been sick. The guys that were gassed had a special problem after the war, because the gas, especially the chlorine gas, would get into their lungs and eat away at that fine, soft tissue that's in your lungs and destroy your lungs. And that made them very susceptible to pneumonia and even TB. And a lot of guys contracted TB very quickly after they got out, or while they were still in. And if you look at the records, they had been gassed. And there's an article in the Fond du Lac paper in 1919 stating that all the soldiers that had been gassed should come down and see the Red Cross, because they knew they were having a problem with these guys. So, and this is actually this headstone here is Guy Gross. He grew up here in Fond du Lac. He's buried overseas, and he was gassed in a battle, and he never made it past the aid station. Let's go back one. We didn't just fight in Europe. We actually were fighting in Russia, in the Siberian Peninsula area of Russia, eastern Russia. We supported after the Russians signed an armistice with the Germans. We supported the White Russian Army to fight the Bolsheviks. And just not a number of men as we had in Western Europe, but we had a couple of regiments over there. Each regiment's about 3,700 guys, and the losses were about just over 100. But those guys were still there after the actual peace treaty was signed in June of 1919. They were still in Russia. They were just starting to come back home. And we had several guys from Fond du Lac that were there. So they came home late 1919, long after most of the rest of the army came home. All right. Well, not everybody got to come home early. Approximately 7 divisions, and that at 25 to 28,000 men per division, stayed in Europe. The four front divisions along the Rhine in their occupation duty zone were the 1st and 2nd divisions of the regular army, and then the 32nd and the 42nd of the National Guard Army. Actually had 3 armies in World War I. The regulars, the National Guard, which is composed of all the National Guard units, and the National Army, that's called the Draft Army. Those were all the draftees. So we had 3 armies, basically. And the poster, the walk on Rhine, is actually, it's a poem. It was a German poet wrote it in 1848, and shortly after he wrote it, he died in 1856, somebody put it to music. And it became a very popular German song. It still is. At least very popular up till World War II. And it talked about the Rhine being their defensive line. Nobody's going to cross it. You aren't coming here. We're going to defend the Rhine. But the poster was done in 1919, and I really like it because it has a lot of symbolism. Down at the bottom, you see a German helmet and a rifle, indicating that obviously we beat the Germans. We're stepping on you. The soldier standing tall and erect is a victor. He's looking good, he's got that square jaw, you know, looking tough. He could have been a 32nd Division guy. Does anybody know what the first nickname of the 32nd Division was?
First arrow.
What?
First arrow.
No. Iron Jaw. The Iron Jaw. And they changed it. And it became the Red Arrow because of them piercing the line all the time. Just kind of, look at that. It's got that chin sticking out there. And then, of course, he's standing on the cliffs above the Rhine River. And we've raised an American flag on a German castle. Now, yeah, we got you now. We control you. We're going to tell you what to do. And actually, during the occupation duty, we did. Now, I know the map says June of 1918, but I thought this map was really good to show where they started from and where they ended up. And I'm going to talk about the 42nd and the 32nd Divisions, because those are Fond du Lac guys are in there. And Robert Holterman was in the 42nd, and they started at a place called Stenay. It's kind of between Verdun down here and Sedan up here. They formed up 2 days after the armistice. They had a day and a half, 2 days rest, and then they were told to form up as a division and prepare to move out. The 32nd was in the same position, basically, but a little farther south, southeast of the 42nd. They also formed up and were prepared to march. The guys got showers, they got food. They hadn't been eating for days. They were fighting. It was 24/7 for these guys those last days, because they were just pushing the Germans back so quickly. So they got a few days rest, and by agreement that the American forces, or the Allied forces, would not start moving eastward for 7 days. Allow the German military to retreat. So there would be no accidental contact and conflict with them since the peace treaty had been signed, or the armistice had been signed. So they allowed. On the, I believe it's the 19th, they started marching. Now, as the crow flies from Stenay to Onweiler, I should say Onweiler, it's about 230 kilometers, or just, 180 miles, something like that. But, you know, they weren't flying, they were walking. They walked and they walked. They'd march for a couple days and take a good rest. They would stop every night, but they might march 25, 30, or 40 kilometers a day, and then after a couple days of that, they would stop and spend a couple of days resting, getting showers, getting a good meal. But other than that, and they carried everything on their back. They didn't go ride in trucks. They walked. So they had their sleeping gear. They had the rest of their combat gear. They had their overcoat. Remember, this is now November. So the 42nd takes about this kind of a route to their location, which is the blue one. This is where they're going to be for the next several months. And then the 32nd is going to go here. Now, there's more than one division in here too. The 1st Division is also in this area where the 32nd is. I just highlighted that because it's the whole thing. It's the semicircle. The 2nd Division is over here. And there's other divisions stacked up behind them, just in case. They were still concerned that the Germans might just turn right around and come back. So we had to have a little bit of a defensive posture there. And right where that little X is above Luxembourg is a little place called Bissen. Now, Robert Holterman 42nd Division, they spent the Thanksgiving at a little place called Beauvange, which is about 12, 15 kilometers west of Bissett. And one day they got up and they marched out of Beauvange and they came to Bissett and they came, whoop. They came to Bissett and from this direction right over here where this person is standing along by this house, and came around this corner. And the reason I know that is because it's the only way through town. You know, it's there in 2014, and they came around that corner, and from where I'm standing, just another 60, 70 yards behind me, is a bridge. They would cross that bridge, march towards the church, guided around the left of the church and left town. This is not really big, but this is the route they would have taken. They marched right through it, and in his diary, he mentions going through Bissett. So now they get to their occupation duty location, and they start setting up camp, getting everything ready, and it takes them about 30 days to get there. So they've had to walk, and anybody who's ever been in the western part of Germany along the Rhine River knows it's all like this. It's not flat, it's very hilly, and remember they're walking on dirt roads. It's the winter, so you get a lot of rain there in the winter in some places, so it's going to be very muddy. And it was cold. So they get there, and in January, on the 10th of January, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they're going to have some mandatory fun, and we've all had that if you've been in the military. But this is out of Robert's diary also. And they have events, boxing, 140 pounds, the potato race, I can't read that, something about, boxing bout, 170 pounds, a crew race, tug of war, pillow fight, more boxing, a shoe race, mounted wrestling. I'm not quite sure if that was where you got up on somebody's shoulder or they were actually on horses or donkeys or mules, whatever they were using to pull stuff. But mounted wrestling, boxing again at 170 pounds, so you had a fight, and there are 3 regiments, so you had to fight at least twice. Let's see, where's that one? There's something about the guys, some kind of fight with a cup. And I'm not sure if that was one that you had to wear or the one that you held in your hand. So, it doesn't say. But this is out, and you can see that he has who the winners were. You got the 165th, the 166th, and the 150th Machine Gun Battalion. The 165th and 166th are regiments. The battalion is like a quarter size of a regiment. So the regiments had a lot more guys to pick from. And he listed the winners on this. So they had mandatory fun. So it wasn't just all stand and guard duty, but they did a lot of that. They were also allowed to do some traveling. They could get a pass, and they could go back to France or some other place and do some sightseeing. They were able to do a little bit of traveling within their occupation zone. And in his diary, he also left signed passes of where he was allowed to go. And one said that you had to be there at a certain time, that he had to show up at wherever this pass was good for at a certain time in order to go there. And one of his passes was to go to a sporting event, a larger one than the one we just talked about here. This was like a divisional thing. It was a football game. So they had all this stuff going on. Dealing with the locals, the Germans at first were very, very concerned about being occupied, these people along the Rhine River. because they were afraid that the Americans and the Brits and the French were gonna come in and really be mean to them, and they weren't. Especially the Americans were quite civil with the Germans. A lot of our guys spoke German. A lot of these guys that went over there were in the 32nd Division were of German ancestry, because the 32nd came from Michigan and Wisconsin. So, and that's very high population numbers of Germans. So they were able to speak the local language, and even ran into relatives of people they knew back here in Fond du Lac. These guys would find relatives. You know, this area that they marched through, the 32nd, that's where most of the Holy Landers came from. So they would get to know the locals, and you know, there was not supposed to be any of this, you know, being nice to them. You'd be respectful to them. Don't take anything from them. Just make sure they do what they're supposed to be doing, and no flirting or anything like that, right? So, I don't think I need to say anything about this cartoon. This was in the Fond du Lac paper in 1919. Yeah, deaf, dumb, but not blind. He's looking out the side of his eye. And the girls are going, hello. So, and the symbolism, yeah, see that? Rheinstrasse, on the Rhine, the street on the Rhine. So, but that didn't stop them. They flirted with them, and then they were told to get to come home. On the spring, like April and May, both of those divisions are told to get ready to pack your bags, you're going home. They were overjoyed because everybody else is already home. And even a lot of the guys they left with were already home. About 82% of the guys that left in the 150th, Company B of the 150th Machine Gun Battalion were in the or Company B guys. When they got back, only 82% of them were the original Company B guys. The others had been either killed, invalided home for wounds or whatever, or maybe even still. No, I think by then they had all the wounded back. But these guys were all brought back early, so they came to Font, got back. And Company B ended up sailing into Boston. From there they went to Camp Devens, now Fort Devens, where they got showers, hot meals, deloused again, and sent on their merry way with a paycheck. And they ended up in Fond du Lac sometime after that, and the mayor of Fond du Lac and all the other dignitaries kept in touch with the company as it was coming across the country, because they're planning this big to-do when they get home, and they wanted to know exactly when they were to get here so they could have it. The businesses shut down. The stores closed. There was no business going on. Factories were shut down. Everybody turned out to welcome the boys back. This picture is actually from the County Historical Society, and there's another one, and they had all kinds of people. There were 3 separate groups of in this parade. I don't mean just the military, but you had like school kids, you had other social organizations, you had the Red Cross, you had Spanish-American war vets, the Civil War vets that were still alive. They came down the street in cars. And you notice the nice arch, Victory Arch, with the red arrow on. So this is in Fond du Lac. And I believe it is on the corner of Forest Avenue and Main Street. Because this looks like the old Kresge building right here, right? So, That was Forest Avenue and Main Street, Forest Avenue. Let's see, the rail, the trolley track still in the ground, lots of people, everybody was there. There's a picture of one school group marching, or one that says Cleveland School, they got a big sign that says Cleveland School, it's kinda cute. But, they got a big reception home. This would be the 32nd Division one, because the Company B, the 42nd, they didn't get back at the same time. So there was gonna be another parade for them. They were hoping that both divisions, or both units from Fond du Lac would get back at the same time, so they could have one really big parade. But it didn't work out. And they didn't want these guys to wait, because they're gonna start to scatter, and then they wouldn't be there. Alright, well, the guys didn't just come home, so did the girls. Nurses. Army had over 22,000 nurses in World War I. I mean, before the war, hardly any. Army was very against having women in the military. There were some in the military before World War I, but mostly, I think 1907 they allowed men, but not very many at all. But nurses were in great demand. And I think Fond du Lac had 12, 15 nurses in World War I. These are three of them. One over here, Genevieve Dyer. And then one, I got that written down. Yeah. Catherine Thielen is the one down here at the bottom. And June Taylor, and she has nothing to do with the dance group. All right? She's the one in the top corner. Taylor and Thielen, I don't know much about what happened to them after the war, but I know they went on with nursing. There's a lot of these, they were trained nurses. They had gone to school for nursing. So that would have been their life skill. A lot of times the nurses never married. They just continued to work at nursing. Genevieve Dyer is a little different story. She had two sisters that were also nurses. She's a Fond du Lac girl. And in 1914, she was already in conflict in Europe. They sent the Red Cross, the American Red Cross, sent a ship called the Mercy ship to Europe with doctors and nurses and tons of supplies on it. And when they got to Europe, they were divided up in various groups, all the same number of people, and they were sent to all the belligerent countries. One group went to Russia, so it went to Germany, to England, France, Italy. Genevieve went to Austria. She worked in a military hospital in Vienna, Austria. She was there for about 9 months before she came back. When she got back, and when a lot of these nurses got back that were on that ship, they realized that we have to get our act together in the medical field before we get into the war. So they started organizing all the Red Cross units all the way across the country. Genevieve helped organize 5 or 6 of them right here in Fond du Lac County. So they were preparing people to do things that they needed them to do, how to fold bandages and all this other thing, things that they were going to do. After the war, she continued to nurse. One of her sisters worked at a hospital out in San Francisco, and that's where they're buried up, in San Francisco. But she was really good at it. She became a commissioner on the California State Board of Health for hospitals. Shortly after they get back, the nurses are actually there for quite a while. But the armistice, the peace treaty is signed on the 28th of June of 1990, months after the armistice. When the Germans finally, I'm going to say, surrendered to the demands that were put forth in the peace treaty, which really caused a lot of problems. As we know, later on, 20 years later, we have a problem that was caused specifically by World War I. Well, you know, I had that little cartoon up there about that soldier marching down the road. didn't get there yet. Some of the other things we're gonna talk about here, the families, jobs, Prohibition, oh, the guys, man, were they steamed. They're coming back, and there ain't gonna be any beer. They're all going, they should have stayed in Germany. You know, so there's no beer for the next 13 years. Well, I mean, there is, but you can't legally have it. Women's suffrage movement, the 19th Amendment signed, or came into effect in 1920. And guys are seeing an erosion of their power over women. War bond, or the war bonus. The federal government says we're gonna give you some extra money for being over there. The state of Wisconsin said we're gonna give every soldier that served a chunk of money. Well, guess what? Politicians, they didn't get anything. At least not up front. It was even proposed that the counties raise the money to give to the soldiers from their counties. That's a proposal in the state of Wisconsin. They never really got anything. And I think a lot of them just said, oh, the hell with it. It's not, the little bit that they were gonna give us, it's not gonna be anything for me. The only guys that ever got anything were those that were wounded and disabled. I mean, you could have been wounded and it never caused you a problem. But if you were disabled where you had a hard time working or doing something, you lost a limb, an arm, an eye, whatever, then you got something from the government. But other than that, guys got nothing. Kind of like the guys that went to Vietnam that didn't get hurt. They got nothing. Citizenship. Oh, let's see, where's that? The government, and we still had this policy, and I'm not sure quite yet how it works, but the government told all the aliens that enlisted in the military that they would be granted citizenship if they served honorably through the war. No paperwork, none of that red tape and all that stuff, waiting 7 years to get your citizenship, whatever. And they got back, and there's 4 guys I found in the paper that were granted their citizenship in November of 1919. George Calomaris, he was from Greece. A guy by the name of Boveri from Italy. A man by the name of Eriksson from Norway. And a Theodore Kletke from Russia. They were given their citizenship based on their service. And I've seen documents on guys that when they were at camps, going through training, requested their citizenship while they were in the camps. And I know that because I was looking at their paperwork, and you see when they apply for a passport to go back to visit family, it states in there where they got their citizenship, like Camp Funston in Kansas, and when it was granted. So these guys were given their citizenship then too. So, and of course, they all wanted a return to normal. They wanted to get back to life. So they'd been through hell. They'd seen a lot of things that they never wanted to see again. So we're going to talk a little more about a couple of these things here. Yes, some guys did bring women back. This is a Lieutenant Alfred Cleaforth. He was originally from Mayville. He had been in the Army for some time because in 1916, he's a chief clerk at the consulate in Archangel, Russia. He's working in the consulate, part of the embassy in Archangel, Russia. And he meets this young gal there, and they fall in love, and they get married in Archangel. And they also have a child there. His birth certificate is online. It's being born in Archangel. And his younger brother, the young boy that was born there, his younger brother was served in World War II here. But So they come back, and there's a lot of articles in the Fond du Lac paper about them coming back, how they sailed from Archangel to France, and from France to the States, and everything. Come back. His family was living in Fond du Lac at the time. So he brings this Russian Polish girl, and I read one thing that said that she's some kind of from a minor nobility family. But they lived in Archangel for several years, and they were in Germany in 1930. He was working for the embassy in Germany in 1930, so he got to see all these. And I was trying to find out when he left Germany, because I wanted to see if he was there when Hitler took over. And I haven't found any documentation as when he left. But now, on the other side of the screen here, this is a ship's manifest. And this is about soldiers, military people, bringing their families back. This is in 1920. I believe, is that what it says up there? I think it's 1920 or 21. They're bringing the guys back. After all those divisions left, the U.S. left approximately 30,000 troops in Germany as occupation troops, or Germany and along the French border as occupation troops. They didn't leave until 1923. But it lists the wife and her spouse is traveling, the soldier's traveling with her, and then the next line might list a child. Now there's 5 children listed with their parents. They range from 5 weeks to 3 years in age. So now the one that was 3 years, I'm thinking she may have lost her husband in the war, and she already had a kid. So I think this child may have been from another father, based on the date, the age of the child, and when they're coming back. Because we weren't in Germany in 1918. Well, we were kind of at the end. But I think that was from a guy that lost his life in the German army. And what's interesting is the town, on the very right-hand column, it lists where they're from. Almost all these people are from the same area in Germany, where all the Holy Landers came from. So, just south of Koblenz. And here it is, I haven't known. They came back, and this is in June of 1920. So, and there were shiploads of these families coming back. And the guys that were stationed in England were bringing brides back. And there was a hilarious little article in the paper about they had a baby contest on one of the ships. The captain of the ship was about ready to shoot everybody. It got really ugly about whose kid won. was an article in the paper. I thought, man, they said that we ain't doing that anymore. Can you imagine being on a ship? Oh, man, your kid won? Okay. All right. So, and he stays working for the consulate for quite a few years. He passed away, and he's buried in California. Oh yeah, we're going to start over. Housing, and I think that's Jed Clampett. Quality housing shortage right here in Fond du Lac. These guys are all coming back. And what do they want to do? They want to get married. They want a good job. They want to raise a family. But you know what? Housing is very short supply. So we have various construction companies organizing a home builders association to build houses. And at one time, and I don't think we've ever seen this since, at one time there were 150 houses being built in Fond du Lac in 1920. They had that many houses being built at the same time. They're in one stage of completion or another. And of course you need guys to come in and do that work. You need carpenters, you need masons. Well, now you got to figure out where you're going to put them while they're here working. They actually built temporary boarding houses for these guys, and they lived in these boarding houses, and they were like crews. Guys, one crew would, this would be their area of thing to do. So when they're done, the next crew coming in does the next thing, and they would just go basically down the street. Two major housing areas were on Park Avenue, north of Johnson Street, and over along like Morris Street on the west side of the east branch of the river, back there behind the high school. So these were big areas that were being built at the time. There were other areas around Fond du Lac too, but you can see the lands grouping. All conveniences provided. Fred Rupin Realty Company aims at completion of 75 homes by January 1st. So they're expanding. And the state also offered returning soldiers free land up north. Not great farming land, but they were offered free land. I don't know how many of them actually took them up on it and actually made a living at it, but they were given free land. So yeah, Jed Clampett there in his house. So they needed housing, and they needed it very quickly. Expanding economy. Oh. And my favorite one is right there on the top right. Women, now, they've been in the workforce. I mean, they were already in the workforce. There were a lot of women that worked before the war. But now there's so many more that are working. They were doing all these jobs that the guys used to do. And now, the guys are coming back, and the manufacturing companies, and said, oh, you women need to go back home. You need to go back and do those things you were doing before we gave you this job. You need to go back and cook and clean and take care of the house. Take care of your kids, if you haven't. And a lot of women just said, no, not gonna do it. They stayed and they worked. And they did this is just not here in Fond du Lac, and these are all articles out of the Fond du Lac paper. One's across the country. And another thing that's not necessarily related to Fond du Lac is we didn't have big manufacturing, is what's called the Great Migration. During the war, all these guys went overseas. All these factories were taken out of production. But they weren't African Americans that went. There were a couple thousand that actually went overseas. And manufacturers needed workers. So there's what's called the Great Migration. Many African Americans came out of the South into the major cities of the North. Pittsburgh, Detroit, Chicago, all those cities where they had huge manufacturing concerns. That's where they moved. I mean, there were already African Americans living in those cities, but a majority of them came during this time frame. Of course, now that also eliminates jobs for the guys coming back, because we have African Americans doing those jobs. The Rex Typewriter Company out of Fond du Lac, they're going to be shipping 8,000 typewriters overseas next year. That's their goal. This is a booming business here in Fond du Lac. A lot of guys, as I was looking at their draft cards, when they filled them out, a lot of guys worked at Rex Typewriter. They had to put down who their employer was. And they were apparently paid fairly well. The government's also going to train men for vocations. Here's the problem. Not everybody's going to get that. And I think I mentioned it earlier. If you came back and you were healthy and you didn't have a physical disability, they aren't going to give you any training. It's only for those that have a physical disability. Some of the other companies in Fond du Lac that are expanding and doing really well, of course, Rupin Leather is going to expand. The Vulcan manufacturing that used to be up in the park there, they were doing so well, they actually had put an extension on their building where the train could come in. So they could load the train, and they didn't have to do it outside. They could load it up with whatever they needed to load it with while it was inside the building. How nice, they had a spur put right through their building. We had another concern called the Latex Tire Company. They made tires for automobiles. Hey, guess what? Everybody's coming back. Everybody wants an auto. And the automobile factories start to take off. Well, you need to put some shoes on those cars so they can run. So Latex Tire Company was in Fond du Lac. And the really little cute one down here in the lower right-hand corner, we had all those war bonds that people paid heavily, put a lot of money up and got a really good return on them. But now the government's got to pay that debt. So they actually have a Liberty loan drive to raise money to pay the debt, but we also get a luxury tax. And even little kids have to pay it. I don't know if you can read it, but down at the bottom, there's a 1-cent tax on that nickel admission ticket for that kid to go to the matinee. And there's other things, it depends upon, and there's a whole list in the paper about what things are considered luxury taxes and need to be taxed, and the amount of tax that's going to be assigned to it. So even the kiddies going down on Saturday afternoon have to pay a tax. So instead of the nickel, it's 6 cents. The wounded and disabled. This guy's Arnold Bush. His dad owned a grocery store on the corner of Merrill and Main. It's now where the Blueprint Solution is, that brick building on the northwest corner. He had a grocery store there, I think so, like a hardware store also. And he had 2 sons that were in the service. They had a 3rd son who, his name was Edward, and he was still in high school, and he fell in the auditorium at what used to be what we knew as Roosevelt Junior High, and hit his head on a chair and ended up dying from a concussion. But Arnold and his brother John went to war. John didn't make it home. He was killed. Arnold lost an arm. Lost his right forearm. Spent a lot of time, even though he was in the Army, he spent a lot of time in the Naval Hospital after he got back. So they could do whatever they could to repair damage to his arm. So he didn't have an arm, but he was one of these guys that took up that offer for training right away. And he went to Michigan to a business school, and he became an accountant. And he lived in Madison for almost since the 1920s until he passed away. He lived down in Madison and worked as an accountant. I'm not sure if he had his own business or worked for a company all that time, but and he was very active in the 42nd Division Veterans Group here in Wisconsin and in Fond du Lac. And there were a lot of guys that wanted to sign up for this, guys that had been injured. But this is the only one I've come across where he actually has some information about what he was doing. And they want to go to school. Some of you, like I said, unless you were injured, you weren't going. They weren't going to retrain you. Now, I should have given you the fair warning here. Well, we always talk about the guys missing limbs, arm, leg, 2 arms, 2 legs, those things. We don't talk about the guys that had facial head wounds. These guys were shut off to the side. People avoided them. These are actually, this slide and the next one, they're actually British soldiers. And after they recovered enough from their wounds, and you can see this one down here, you can see that most of his mouth is shot away. And then there's a picture of him with a bandage holding his face piece on. And this is the face piece, and you can see it's held on in place. There's a little strap that goes on his glasses. The glasses are actually affixed to this. This is a piece of metal, very thin metal, and it has a coating on it. It looks like it's flesh. And they're specifically made for each soldier's face. It's like you take an artist and you make these face pieces for these guys, and then they paint them. And this is what they have. Some other pictures, there's a lot grosser ones than this, believe me. Pictures where a guy just has a little hole and he can put a cigarette in. But this is what plastic surgery looked like in 1919. I mean, they were still able to do some things with guys, but guys that had really large facial wounds, not so much. And here's another one, a before and after look. And believe me, these are really quite tame compared to some of the other ones. And those things were held on with glasses. Whether you needed glasses or not, it was part of it. It was to hold it up on your face. I'm not sure if they used any kind of material to hold it to the skin itself. All right. Well, all these guys come home, they have great expectations, and of course a lot of them didn't realize that two guys came home, a guy by the name of Ward Large and Herbert Sonnenberg. They're both from Herbert was from Fond du Lac, and Ward Large, I believe, spent most of his life in the Oakfield area. They started with families and raised boys. And each one lost a son in World War II. So, still guys over there. This is still occupation time, 1921. This is October of 1921. The American government has finally got its act together to have a tomb of the unknown. The European countries have already done it. You know, a year and a half before this, they already had their tomb of the unknown and the big ceremony to go with it. Edward Younger was one of 7 guys that were sent to a place called Chalons in France. And he knew basically why he was going to go there, or somewhat knew what he was supposed to do. And they thought that these 7 guys were going to be the pallbearer for the body that was going to be for the tomb of the unknown. Well, he gets there, they're not. He was selected out of the 7 to do something else. And he was a combat veteran, wounded in World War I. Re-enlisted and went back to Germany. That's because they didn't have any beer here, so they didn't want to go back. This is downtown Chalons. It's on the Marne River, and that's the Hotel de Ville. The Hotel de Ville is not a hotel; it's a government building. So if you ever go to Europe and you're traveling around in France and you see a Hotel de Ville, you're not checking in. Okay. So you can go in, but you're not going to check in for a room unless you're going in the back room in the patio, where the cops are. As a matter of fact, there's in 2014, right around the corner, part of this building was the police station. This is a square out front. Okay. And right here, you can just barely see this. This is the casket carrying the remains of that we're going to go to the tomb of the unknown. Well, and Edward Younger was the guy that got to select which casket it was. 4 caskets with draped in American flags inside, and he was the only one in there, and he was given a spray of roses to put on one of the caskets, which he did. 3rd one from his left. And he said later, that one just kept calling to me. So, the casket comes out, and it's a big ceremony. French are really, really putting on the show here. I mean, the streets are just lined. And every place on that train, where that train went, the streets were lined through all these cities. And in the 40s, Edward died, and he's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. But he's not the only guy that was involved with this casket. There are 8 other unknowns. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll tell this part first. The 3 headstones right here in the front are the other caskets from that day at Chalons. They were taken to the Meuse-Argonne American Cemetery and interred in section G, right in the front row. So those 3 right there. Here's the guys that we really don't know anything about. They're the pallbearers. All combat veterans, several Medal of Honor recipients, other awards, Distinguished Service Cross, Navy, Marine Corps, Army, from all different types of jobs in those services. One guy is a chief torpedo man, another one was a chief water tender. There was a Army engineer. The Marine guy was an infantryman, or some of the other infantrymen. This guy right here, Samuel Woodville, Pershing believed he was the best soldier on the battlefield during World War I. And the gentleman right here, Saunders, he was a Native American. One of the most highly decorated Americans from World War I. Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, and the French Croix de Guerre. Croix de Guerre is the equivalent of the Medal of Honor. These guys would be the ones that carry the coffin. I gotta go back, I'm sorry. I wanna talk to you about this. Oh, going the wrong way. I don't wanna sit on those. We go to Wash. All right, when these guys came back, and talked about Arnold Bush, a lot of these guys had other injuries, not those physical ones like Bush had, but they had those emotional ones, mental problems that came about from their service. There was a guy, John Petropoulos. He was a Greek, went to war with the 47, the Company B guys. And when he came back, he has been suffering from shell shock, which we now call PTSD. So severely that he had been court ordered, in court here in Fond du Lac, to be put in the hospital in Oshkosh, the Northern Hospital in Oshkosh. After a period of time there, he was let out, but his condition never really changed, and he died. He's buried in Ryan's Cemetery. But these guys that came back, deathly afraid of fireworks, cars backfiring. They were nervous about a lot of things. So they were suffering, and there was no help for them, really. They got no help. Of course, we still have a long way to go with those things today, but these guys got virtually no help for any mental, emotional conditions that they had. we're back to these guys. So. Now, I didn't know about, I knew some of the things I'm gonna talk about right now, but this is in much more detail, and it's quite interesting. And I'm not selling this book, I didn't write it, okay? But I understand that the library has ordered it.
We have it.
It's here, okay. If you're interested in World War I history, you've gotta read this book. And this is about these 8 guys. And I should say 9, younger, and these 8 guys right here. Not so much about the guys that buried in the tomb of the unknown, but it's about these guys. It talks about their experience in the war. And they were selected out of 300 names that were given to Pershing. Pershing actually reviewed all 300 files on these guys and selected these 8 guys. Now, he also reviewed that Younger's file, but when he saw Woodville, he automatically, it was just like, he's in the list, because he already knew him. So these guys are personally selected by Pershing to be the pallbearers. And what's really interesting is how they selected the body, how they determined where we're gonna get the body that we want Younger, one of those 4, how are we gonna do that? So the Graves Registration Service, the Army, set up a plan that they would take 4 of the 5 American cemeteries in France, and they would send a team to each location. The team consisted of an officer, an embalmer, and a few other helpers. They had a car and a truck. Excuse me. And it was all planned, it all had to be done on a certain day. Everybody did it all on the same day. They went to the 4 cemeteries. They were given, the officer was given 2 envelopes. And he didn't know if there was a number inside, it was a grave number. Because the graves registration people had just said, we're just gonna put the grave number on there. And when you get to that cemetery, you're gonna see the director, and you're gonna open up one of the envelopes. And that is gonna be your primary grave. And so, I'm gonna read you a little passage here, but they would go to that, this group got to the cemetery at St. Neil, and the crew there dug down a ways into the ground the night before. In the morning, this crew comes out, and there's nobody else there. It's basically the lieutenant and the embalmer, and the other guys are way off to the side. And they're gonna finish digging the grave out until they get to the body. And then they are going to slowly take everything apart, to make sure that there's nothing on the uniform, a photo, a piece of paper that can identify this guy, even the littlest bit, from where he might be or who he is. And if they find that, they stop, then they go get the second envelope, and they go to that next grave. All 4 original envelopes, they found nothing. So, it's quite an interesting little process. I just want to read a little bit, and this is on October 22nd, 1921. Now, this is only 2 weeks before the interment at Arlington National Cemetery. 2.5 weeks. First rays of dawn poked through the trees at the eastern edge of the U.S. military cemetery in Thiaucourt, France, as Lieutenant Arthur E. Dewey and a supervisory embalmer knelt on the muddy earth beside one of the hundreds of crosses in the field. Each white marker designated the final resting place of one of the Americans who had fallen in the Battle of St. Neil. Bundled against the morning chill, the 2 men began their grisly task, painstakingly sorting through the remains buried in this plot, searching for anything that could identify the man who had been interred on the site. Nearby sat a gleaming steel gray Springfield casket, its polished surface contrasting sharply with the gritty, russet soil of the grave. Having fallen in battle 3 years prior, the body was badly decomposed. Despite their best efforts to treat the deceased with respect, pieces of fabric and undoubtedly rotting flesh fell away as Dewey and the embalmer carefully exhumed the dead soldier. They sifted through the cold, damp earth with their fingers, searching for dog tags, photographs, scraps of paper, or anything else that could possibly identify who the man was, or who the man had been in life. So they were actually down in there, because those guys weren't buried in caskets. They were wrapped in canvas and buried. And when they removed the remains, placed it on cloth material, and then put it in the casket. They sealed it up, and each team had a casket, and all 4 of those caskets were absolutely identical. There were no markings on them. All the screw holes were in the same place. Everything. After that was done, Lieutenant burned that piece of paper that had that number on it and the other envelope, so nobody would know which one it was, or where it came from, or what it was about. And then they went to the Meuse Argonne American Cemetery the next day and picked up another crew that had done the same thing there, and they motored to Chalons. So there was the staff car and 2 trucks and a backup truck. And they got to near Chalons, they stopped, they cleaned the trucks off, put flags on the caskets, and motored into town right on schedule. The caskets were offloaded, taken into the Hotel de Ville, and 10 minutes later, 2 vehicles from the other 2 cemeteries showed up, and the same process was done. So now we've got these 4 caskets in there, and everybody, a lot of people know exactly where these caskets came from. Because this truck came from St. Neil, this one came from the Somme. They knew exactly where those caskets were. Well, that evening, a team of men went in there and moved the caskets around and switched them. So nobody would remember, nobody would know, and of course they're identical. Nobody would know which one it was. After they left, and later in the evening, 2 senior embalmers went in there and opened the caskets up and moved the remains of each casket into another casket. Further making it harder to identify who these guys were. The next morning, after the selection process had taken place, the casket comes out almost immediately. The French actually bore the casket out of the Hotel de Ville. Another team went into the hotel, opened up one of the other caskets that was not selected, because the remains that are in the Tomb of the Unknown in Arlington were actually taken out of his casket and put into a much fancier one for the trip. This other crew comes in there and takes the remains out of one of those caskets that was not selected and puts it in that one and seals them up. And those 3 are the ones that now were taken to the Meuse Argonne Cemetery and buried there. And the other one is just the whole thing all the way to Washington. All right. This is in Washington D.C. at the Naval Station on the Potomac River, and you can see this is a colorized thing. Of course, it was not that. But right here, here's Woodville, Pershing's greatest soldier, and Pershing is right here on the corner. He's saluting as the flag is being, or as the casket's being taken away. It goes to the National Capitol, placed in the rotunda, or underneath the rotunda, and is there until the morning of November 11th. It's open to the public. They estimated between 90 and 96,000 people came to view the casket in the rotunda. A lot of mothers whose sons never came home, were never accounted for, showed up thinking that was their son. And now a lot Arlington. Now, one of the other interesting things about the Tomb of the Unknown for World War I, all the Allies presented the place their highest award, military award, on the casket. That was before it was lowered in. And an American Indian chief called Puntycoop placed his coop stick and his war bonnet on that one also, in recognition of all the Indians, the Native Americans that served in the military. So. Oh, that's it. I hope I didn't bore you too much with it, but.
What about the farmers?
Oh, the farmers, okay. Let's see now, what about the farmers? Yeah, they were pretty much non-select to go in the draft, unless you had your farmhand, stuff like that. Those guys would be selected. Now, so you got a farm out there, and you've got a hired man, and next thing you know, he's going off to the war. You don't have any children to farm that for you, and you're getting on in age, but you're still farming. Who's going to do your work? You would actually have high school kids come in and help. They would actually suspend classes for like a week in the fall, and all these high school kids and would go out and help the farmers gather the harvest. And they also had, if you needed something else done, they had what they call the flying squad, and it was basically run by the mayor in Fond du Lac, and he would gather people, and if you broke a leg or something like that, they'd go out there for a few days and do your work until you could get something else organized. So they had these businessmen who were going out and working on a farm. And a lot of guys thought, a lot of farmers read in articles that wasn't as good a thing as it sounds, because they didn't know anything about farming. So, but they were there. It was a show of support. But yeah, farmers were a special thing, and not getting drafted or and getting help. And they also had a thing called the Council of Defense. Every state had one. Wisconsin was one of the leaders in this. They had to get down to the county and all the townships. There's cards at the County Historical Society that shows you who was on the Council of Defense for each town, for each section in the township. And that guy's job was to go around and make sure that if you needed something, it'd get done. And if you weren't doing the right things, it'd get done too. Because you'd be reported. You're hurting the war effort by not keeping your farm clean and getting rid of stuff and whatnot. Or you might have a pile of scrap metal there, you didn't turn it in, you get reported. So these guys were kind of like the local spy, the tattletale. Yeah, sure.
In Washington, D.C., we have the Korean Memorial, we have the Vietnam Wall, we have now the World War II Memorial. In
Yeah.
Fond du Lac, we have the Civil War statue that did his 180 this
Yeah.
year. We have the Spanish-American monument going into Lakeside Park. What do we have in Fond du Lac County, well, let's broaden it out, for World War I? And do you, with a passion for World War I, the Great War, do you feel it's, in a way, almost the forgotten war, which we always label Korea with?
There's only those basically two monuments in town. Now, it's like I sit there, I sit there always going through the newspaper on the microfilm. There were other things done in Fond du Lac, plaques and stuff put up. Well, they've kind of disappeared.
No statuary.
No statuary though. Things have been moved, and not quite sure. Oh, we've got the Civil War thing over there on Seymour, the camp. That's there. But other than that, there's really nothing. I went looking for the Civil War monument in North Fond du Lac, Civil War, World War I in North Fond du Lac. It's supposed to be at the Sioux Line shops. It was on a big piece of granite, and there was a picture of it in the 1970s in the Fond du Lac paper. Well, I couldn't find it. It had all the names of the guys that had served that worked for the the sewer line. So there's things missing, and Mary Fran Merwin, when Goodrich High School closed its doors, she took that plaque that sat in the front entrance, all the graduates of Fond du Lac High School that served in the war, and took it and put it up in the front entrance at New High School. She said, that thing's going with us. You know, I don't even remember seeing that thing there. So, I never went through that door. I always used the one that was closest to my house. So I never remember seeing that in there. But it's out there in the main entrance of the Fond du Lac High School. But yeah, you're right, there's nothing else. And I'm gonna say this, but I think that the plaques in the county, city's building are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. You only get to see them when the building's open? And how many of you go there on a regular basis? No, oh, I do, because I go to look at Register of Deeds office for documentation, but, you know, if they're up there on the wall, they're not out where the public can see them. And I mentioned that to somebody one day, and they said, well, that wasn't the design for the Veterans Park to put any monuments there. You know, we don't have to put all the people that served on, but I think we should put on the ones that lost their lives in the Civil War. Now, I will tell you, Civil War, get ready because you're gonna need a huge stone. About 650 men from Fond du Lac County died in the Civil War. That's more than all the other wars put together. So, you need a huge stone. But I think that we should have stones out there or something that we can look at. I mean, yeah, it's a nice park, it's a nice place to go and sit, and you can't take your dog in there, things like that, but, you know, you're right, there's just those three things. There was supposed to be one for Joyce Kilmer, or where the Hamilton building used to be, you know, there was supposed to be a plaque over there, it was put up in the 1930s? It's not over there. So, who knows? Any other questions? Yes, I'm sorry.
I'm part of the American Legion Auxiliary here in town, and we pointed out to parties in the city that the plaque on the wall in City Hall is inaccurate.
Oh, I know that.
Yeah,
There's a
well,
guy.
we pointed it out, and we suggested that we do something at a memorial, and we were told that over his dead body, there would be no further memorial.
There's an individual on that one, in the World War II, that did not die in the war, died before the war. The war had not been declared. There's one on the Vietnam Memorial. He didn't die in Vietnam. He died in an aircraft accident in South Korea. You know, those things, if you're gonna do something, get your stuff right. You know, because I think it's really important that we have it correctly done. So, and I don't want to diminish those two individuals, and I think there's a couple others on some of those, but there's guys that aren't on there that should be on there.
Yeah, that's what we were trying to point out there was a great lack of information, and it was really
Oh,
inaccurate.
yeah,
As
like
you
the
pointed out about
World
that.
War I.
Yes, for World War I, and that is,
Yeah.
you know.
I have my list of World War I people here, and a copy of Ralph Holterman's diary, but, I mean, I've documented all where they were, when they died, where they were born and stuff like that, and it's all research. You go and you start looking, and and it's amazing what you'll find out about people, when you start looking at these guys, so.
I worked for the Reporter, and in doing so, I chased many leads that the County Historical Society didn't want to. And I was able to interview a World War I soldier. He was in his 90s. He was from La Costa, and his family was the Miller family that ran the mill.
Okay.
And he told me about growing up in that and how he was assigned to France. And I knew enough about World War I that I knew that they rode on the trains and things that he was surprised of that my generation would know anything
Yeah.
about, okay?
The 40 and 8.
And
40 men or
I
8
asked him
horses?
I asked him what he did, and he said he was a third shift blacksmith. And I asked, could you be a third shift blacksmith? He said, well, during the war, they had to keep up the animals because they were the workhorses of getting all this equipment around and everything else. And even though there were trucks, because of the mud and all that, they were undependable, so the horses were really super important.
And we didn't have a lot of trucks.
Yeah.
We were still a horse unit until World War II.
Yeah.
We still had horses pulling stuff.
Yeah. And he said he had to work third shift, and it was a double tent. And it was a double tent to keep the fire, the lights down, so that
Mhm.
they couldn't use that as
Right,
a
so-
tracking
right.
device on the
For
other
the,
part.
yeah,
Yes.
aircraft flying over, see that light sticking out, yeah.
And I asked him what was his most memorial experience that, stands out to this day yet. And he said there was a air fight between one of their German pilots and one of ours. And the German pilot's plane got hit, and it was the double wing plane.
Biplane.
Yes, and he said he knew he was coming down, and we were down below when this happened, watching this. And he said the guy got out of the plane, and that's when he realized he was a human being. And he had to jump.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, a lot of those pilots, when they're shot down, they didn't want to crash, they would jump out. The guys that were in those balloons, observation balloons, had parachutes. They would jump out and open their parachute. They called them sausages. Because they were kind of long, thin, like sausage casing, so they called them sausages in World War I. But that's not a job you want in Signal Corps, being in a balloon or something like that, because you're really sitting ducks. Even though you can see a long ways, that plane comes by and it's lights out. Other questions? Yes, sir.
May I ask one of the crowd?
Sure.
How many of you have relatives or ancestors that fought in the First World War? Is there anybody here? Have any of them, or were any of them in the First Division by any chance?
I have a picture of my
Oh.
father on the steps of courthouse, and I don't.
Oh, you got one of, oh yeah, those are all the honor guys. Oh.
And there are two. And those two are the only two I know on there. I have a lot of letters from my.
Oh, I would definitely want to talk with you. Oh, you've become my new best friend. Back? Yeah, you shut that off, you don't. Oh. They, back in, when the draft, once everybody registered, then a little bit later on, they started pulling numbers and names. Actually, they were just numbers, and you got one of those. Oh, I did? Okay. So, when the guys, if they said, Fond du Lac County or District 1, you gotta come up with 20 people. So they would go through their thing, and whoever's numbers that were supposed to be pulled, they would get. And they would go to the courthouse the day before they left, or the day of, depending upon where they were leaving from, and they would have their photo taken. And they're called honor men. And unfortunately, in the paper, a lot of the pictures are really poor, and they don't name them, which is really a shame. It's like a lot of other photos, the names are never put on them, so you don't know who these guys are. There's articles saying that these guys left, but you don't know which guy is which guy. So these are, having one of these is really nice. So the draft, and I think there were like 14 of these groups over a period of several months that were taken, and they're all up on there, and plus the ones from Ripon, the second division guys would also, a lot of times they would have their photo taken here, and then they would go to Ripon and then get on the train at Ripon. Other questions? No other questions? Well, thank you very much. Oh.